We're going to get started. So, modern B2B product leadership. Product leadership is a topic that I think is starting to get much needed attention beyond product management. So, we're really excited to be here and talk about the evolving role of the product leader, particularly in modern B2B software. If I can ask the audience, it'd be great to see with a show of hands who in here is in a product role. Product managers, designers. Okay, cool. Almost everybody.
Nice.
So you're in the right place. Thanks for being here with us. We really appreciate it. I'll introduce the panel. So we'll start with Megan Barry, VP of Product at Octane AI. Megan, do you want to talk a little bit about Octane?
Yeah, so we do Facebook Messenger marketing for e-commerce and retail brands. So we work with everyone from Kiehl's and CoverFX to smaller boutiques, helping them do Facebook Messenger bots and marketing.
I'm Esteban Contreras, VP of Product at Hyper with a 3. We're a geosocial marketing platform that helps brands engage, analyze, and acquire high-value customers at their locations worldwide. Next is Mark Hazlett, Product Manager at Clio.
Hey, I'm Mark. I'm a Senior Product Manager at Clio. Clio is the world's leading cloud-based legal practice management suite. So we build software for legal professionals.
Awesome.
And Mik Lernout is VP of Product at Hootsuite.
Yeah, hey guys. I'm with Hootsuite. We're the biggest social media management company in the world. We help organizations build meaningful relationships with their customers on social.
And if anyone feels inclined to tweet, we're using hashtag B2B Product Lead. All right, let's get right to it. So what is a product leader? And what are some great qualities to have? Let's start with you, Megan.
Yeah, so definitely what it means to be a product leader changes company to company, but typically it is someone who is responsible for the strategy and execution of the product. I think what also makes product leaders unique is they are typically working with engineering. Engineering isn't reporting to them, so it's an interesting role where you are collaborating as you build that vision. I think a good product leader is someone who definitely can think strategically, but also is able to be very empathetic because they have to be able to motivate the team as well as have empathy for the customer to build the right solution.
I think I second the empathy piece. I think you have to really, as a product leader, be able to fall in love with the problem. We're often inspiring the rest of our teams, inspiring the people that we work with, and inspiring our customers. And you have to be able to communicate really effectively and think really strategically. And I think those are kind of additional benefits to empathy.
Yeah, maybe just to build on top of that, I think another huge characteristic is curiosity as well. Like, I think great product leaders have this really sense of curiosity around the world around them, like their customers, the industries, the markets, and their. Oh, sorry, awesome, thank you. I'm kind of leaning back here a bit. Just being really curious about the world around you and around how it works, and that kind of leads into empathy, and there's really deep empathy, and then being able to act on that empathy as well, being able to change things to make things move. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like ultimately you need to have customer success and customer growth. And so product leaders should be able to guide their teams. They should be able to ship and validate and scale. And I think elevate the overall company. So I'd like to ask the two of you, you've both been at companies or are at companies that have been around for almost a decade or if not more than a decade. So how would you say your company's view of product leadership has changed?
Yeah, so I think Hootsuite has been around for 8-9 years or so, and it kind of goes through these different phases where I think Hootsuite in particular, we started together with kind of the beginning of social really blowing up and social becoming something meaningful for organizations and for customers, and we kind of grew up on top of that growth, and with that, it's like our kind of style of product leadership or what product management meant for us was almost more to try to kind of contain the energy of this really fast growing market and this really fast growing product with all these customers coming on board. And I think over the last couple of years, as the market's matured, like our practices changed pretty radically. Like where before it was all about kind of containing the energy and channeling the energy, I think right now, I think the role of product management at Hootsuite very much has evolved into actually being the energy. Like we want to be the change agents. We want to be the kind of part of the organization that's going to identify where we need to go next, and then kind of take that energy and release it inside of the company. And so kind of moving from this kind of reactive mode into this proactive mode, I think is kind of the journey that we've been on. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really similar for us, and I think, so Clio just actually had our 10-year birthday party this past week, and I think we think about two things really differently. So the first is around process. I think when we were first starting out, process was, this thing was kind of viewed to stifle innovation, and now we think very differently about process and how it helps us align the organization. And I think now we spend a lot more time getting alignment and buy-in up front, and I think that is where we spend actually the majority of our time as product managers at Clio, because it helps us remove roadblocks later down the road. So I think those are kind of two things that have really shifted for us over the course of the 10 years.
Looking at it from a different perspective of an early stage company, Megan, I think Octane AI is the earliest stage company represented up here. So I'm really curious about how the founders decided that it was time for a VP of product role.
Yeah, well, I think when you're talking about that early stage, I started talking to the founders when the company was only about 6 months old, and it was still in quasi-stealth mode, and I think it's less about them deciding that they were ready for a VP product, and there was certainly no open job position, nothing out. It was more us realizing that we would love to work together and that there was a need of like organizing the product vision and getting ready for us to scale our engineering team and product team, and that I could be the right person for that. So I think when you are looking to join an early stage company, don't wait for them to have an open position, because a lot of times these things get settled before that ever happens.
Yeah, I think that was very similar to how it happened at Hyper. The co-founders were handling the business, the UX side and the technology, right? And everybody's seen that graph that puts those things together, and there was a realization of, for us to scale, we need to go think about product management as a long-term effort, not as something that can be part-time for the team. Which leads me to the next question of how you structure a team and how do you make sure that the team is in the right order, and who reports to who. So how are your PMs, your designers, and your engineers organized, and a little bit of why?
Yeah, I can maybe try to kick off. So we've got this concept, and I think it's used in a bunch of other companies, including Spotify. I think is probably where some of the inspiration came from. We call them triads. So for us, generally as an organization, we have a strong design leader, we have a strong product manager leader, and a strong engineering leader. So we get kind of this triad at the very, very top. And then for each of the different product areas and then product teams even, we have kind of smaller triads underneath. And so one thing that we found is really effective is if you have this kind of this triangle, like these 3 points of really, really strong leaders that are all pulling into a particular direction, and you have this really strong creative conflict between them, you create really, really good products, because you have this voice of the customer, this voice of the user, and then I guess the voice of quality or the voice of engineering, which actually does things. And so you have this very, very kind of powerful conflict between them that can be extremely powerful. And so that's kind of one of the ways that we've actually set up that we've organized. Like we have these 3 leaders at the very top, and then each of the different teams have these kind of triads all the way down to the squad level. Yeah.
Mark, I think your team is more structured around themes, right? How does that work?
Sure. So we have kind of our vision, and then we kind of go into themes from there. And we kind of have 4 themes across the organization, and these themes are kind of centered around customer problems that our customers experience. And from there, we kind of go into our squads, where that's where we also have a triad of a product manager, designer, and a dev manager that kind of are responsible for that theme. And we'll have kind of multiple squads per theme. And that's kind of, we found that to be really successful, just to remove some of the silos.
Yeah, so triads, squads.
Yeah.
For us,
sounds very badass. Nice.
So I bet everybody has a different name for it. But we went from a big team to 4 pods, and each of them being, I would say, semi-autonomous, very focused. 3 of them focused on jobs to be done. We really like the jobs to be done framework. and also one pod that's focused on infrastructure. Even within infrastructure, we are thinking of how we do design, how we do product management in that team. Megan, what about you?
Yeah, so we're smaller, so we're more loosely organized. We basically just have two sets, which product and design reports up into me, and then engineering reports up into our CTO. And obviously, we're working very closely together. We try to keep it looser, more collaborative, which we can do because we're small. But the way we kind of try to bring everything together is whenever we're talking about product items, we're always making sure we really push hard on making sure everyone understands why we're doing something. So even like every ticket we put into our ticketing system, it has to have a why, or else I'll like get rid of it. Because then you can enable collaboration. Whereas I feel like when things are not working, engineers just get tasks that are like, add a red button here, go do it. And that's a terrible way to have teams work together.
Working in B2B SaaS, we're not exactly sending people to the moon, right? We're not curing disease. We're not designing flying cars. So it's a very specific problem. And as product leaders, we need to believe 100%, and we need to get other people to believe 100%. So how do you personally stay motivated and inspired, and how do you motivate and inspire others?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's common among product managers and product leaders, but I just have a love of seeing things go live and get in the hands of customers and getting positive customer feedback. Like for me personally, that's such a high. So in terms of the team, part of it is what I was talking about in terms of like making sure everyone understands why you're building something, because that is motivating. This is a customer problem, we're trying to solve it. Here's the solution. Maybe you're even co-creating that solution, which is also a big motivator. And that's super important. But beyond that, sharing outcomes, which doesn't always happen in every product org, where you go back and you said, actually, like this customer, and we've now increased our revenue 14%. And making sure that throughout the whole org, everyone understands those outcomes are happening because of the product they're building. And I think that's incredibly motivating.
Mark?
Sure. I think this is one of the biggest challenges that we face as an organization. I mean, we're building software for lawyers. We don't have that many lawyers that work at Clio, and it's often challenging to stay inspired or to inspire our teams when we're building software for people that is not necessarily their target market, or they wouldn't use the software on a daily basis. And I think that can be really, really challenging, but to overcome that problem, you really have to connect with the problem that you're solving and connect your team with the problem that you're solving. So we bring all of our engineers on customer interviews with us so that they can kind of understand the pain that our customers are feeling. We also try and connect it to the consumer side of the business. So I don't know how many of you have worked with a lawyer in the last little while. It generally isn't as an amazing experience as you need it to be or as you want it to be. And so we really try and connect with that problem and connect our teams with that problem. But especially in B2B, when your team is not your target market, that can be really challenging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that, like, kind of building that, we call them purpose chains, like this idea of having this greater purpose and then having everybody kind of ladder into that, I think is super powerful. And actually, I mean, we definitely, our focus is very much on building human connections, creating human relationships, actually something I'm personally kind of passionate about. But I think actually really understanding your customers and sharing in their success, like when we help them well, we enable them well, they're going to be, I mean, some of them have to use our stuff all day. Like, we need to give them great experiences. We need to be able to delight them along the way. We need them to be able to grow in their career. And so I feel that actually the human impact of what you do, even in B2B, is actually pretty massive. And I think really embracing that and kind of, again, like building empathy with that, I think is really powerful when you try to kind of bring purpose to a team.
Yeah, for us, we talk a lot about surprising and delighting and how our customers need to do that for their customers, right? But if we're not surprising and delighting our users, we're not respecting our users, I think it's evident, right? And part of what motivates me is to not only think of like how are we getting stuff out there, how are we getting our products and features, but also how are we part of changing the mental model around enterprise software, which I think the model has changed a little bit, but it still has a ways to go, which connects good to the next question. around UX and CX. B2B and consumer software will always be different. I think there is a separation of buyer and user sometimes, so it's a big difference, but the expectations are indeed changing. So I'm curious how you see B2B and B2C differing when it comes to UX and CX, and whether you think this is evolving or not.
I could start. I think historically B2B has had awful UX and has been able to get away with it because once you sell in a customer, it's like there's all this huge inertia to move, and you don't have the same need. Like most B2C companies would just never succeed, never take off if they had horrible UX. Not everyone. There's definitely like some banks that you log into certainly aren't great. But I think you're seeing that change, and I think you're seeing companies demand better experiences from their B2B software, and I think that's a really great thing for the industry. Part of what's difficult about it is that when you're building B2B tools, they typically are power tools, and they need a ton of settings and a ton of options because they need to work for complex organizations. And so personally, I find it very interesting to try to figure out how do you continue to have really great UX when you need to maintain these level of options and the power behind the tool. You can't just have, an Instagram where there aren't that many things you can do with it, which is done purposefully so it's simple.
Mark?
I think that's really interesting. The level of setting is definitely a challenge, particularly when you're dealing with different types of customers. I think the other big challenge around UX and CX for B2B versus B2C is around how we actually release product to our customers. So if you have a customer that relies entirely for their business or their livelihood on your software, and they wake up one morning and the software is entirely different, that's not going to be a very great experience for them. And so it's not to say that you shouldn't ship ever or shouldn't launch, but you have to be very careful about how you go about doing that, how you onboard those customers to make sure that they understand and you're not disrupting their day-to-day, but at the same time you're trying to move fast. I think that can be really challenging.
Yeah, we at Hootsuite, we have kind of an interesting kind of like problem, I guess, or in many ways it's an opportunity as well. Like we have, we kind of grew out of a freemium model, so we have a lot of users that use our product for free. We have a lot of users that use our product and just pay us like a relatively small amount of money, and then we have enterprise customers that are very much where the person buying the software is different from the person that's using the software. And so we're kind of fortunate because we basically, the way that we've built and the way that we're organized was there to serve as these kind of freemium users and like these high volume of users, which meant that we were forced to always think about design. We were always forced to think about making things really, really usable. But it's also, I think, gave us a bit of discipline going up, like onto the enterprise. When you think about more complicated systems, is like it kind of gives us an advantage there as well. And I feel like we're talking about, for example, settings and options, which is something that you get a demand for on the very top end. And maybe it was because our size, we're fortunate enough to do that, but we've been able to make choices there as well. And I feel like sometimes and definitely when I was in enterprise product development before, or product management before, there's actually kind of a laziness to having lots of settings. It means that you didn't really think through the problem. You're kind of reacting, and so I think kind of going that extra level of like, let's really understand what people are trying to do, and at times say, no, we're not going to go and do this. We're actually, just before we kind of came on, we were talking about the MailChimp Delights thing. I'm not sure who here has ever used MailChimp, but they have this mail marketing automation software. And they have this really cool step where you send out an email campaign, and there's their logo is a chimp. So it gives you a little high five, or it presses a big red button and then gives you a little high five after to make you feel good. And apparently there's an option to turn that off, which is a very, I guess for certain enterprise customers, it was unacceptable to have a chimp giving you a high five. But it's interesting, like there's choices there that were being made, and we're in control of that. And I feel like having some of that kind of B2C rigor where you just can't do that kind of stuff, actually have that change the way you think about what you do for the enterprise is really empowering, but it's also a lot of hard work. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that the companies that are blurring the lines between SMB and enterprise are really interesting. Slack has when you go to settings, there's a button that says surprise me, and you click on it, and it has this little bear that high fives you and does the exact same thing,
Yeah.
I think. And there's no reason for it. There's no purpose on it more than just to delight the user. And you can tell that they're thinking about these little things, right? Or the magic link. So we like to think that we are building for users, for people that are using Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, you know, as regular people as we do. And we want to respect them in the same way, and we want them to enjoy the time that they're spending on Hyper. I think in the past there has been a lot of thinking around how do we get them to spend all their time in here being super inefficient, or how do we avoid them even getting on and just paying us the big bucks? I like to think about it like how do we get them to be super efficient, but how can the system be very smart and designed in such a way that the moments that you spend on it, you enjoy. And that there are no moments that you don't enjoy. And I think that's a high aspiration that consumer software always has had, and in B2B sometimes we're like, well, they're not going to love our software, so why even try? So for the next segment, I'd like to do a little bit of multiple choice. So I think everybody's heard this analogy of the CEO of the product, and all of us up here agree that this analogy is just pretty terrible. So we asked the question, what other jobs that maybe would be a little bit more fun or more relatable compared to that of the product leader? And this is what everybody said without seeing each other's answers. So Megan and Mark said chef, and Mik and I said film director. Maybe Mark, you want to take chef? I know that you're very passionate about the chef comparison.
It's funny, I actually don't think of a good product leader as a chef. I actually think of like what happens to a bad product is actually the result. So if you can imagine a really nice fancy restaurant where the head chef is continuously adding items to the menu every day, day in and day out, without ever removing anything. Like I feel like that's where a lot of people get trapped in from a product leader standpoint, and that really connects with me. I think that I see a lot of products in that space that just continuously add and add and add without ever removing, and not having kind of an idea of who their target customer is. And for me, that's the job of the head chef. So,
yeah, for me with film director, I think it's because my brother is a director, and I had no idea of how much the director is involved with. They look at the story, the treatment, you know, fundraising, cinematography. They do a lot of things that you would think they don't do. And it's different because it's not as glamorous or as interesting. I think both you and I maybe are thinking, oh, it's exciting to be a film director. But I do think that there's a lot of things that they get involved with and that they have to inspire people that do things that are very different from what they do. And that's what I found kind of interesting.
Yeah,
I don't know if either of you want to.
I kind of like I was kind of trying to figure out, should I pick chef or film director? I think one really important difference, which is why maybe go with film director, is I think for me, chef seems way harder. Like chef is all about like every plate you send out needs to be perfect. And it's also very much command and control culture where you have as a chef, you have very strict control about exactly what happens. Like you have full control of the outcome. And I feel a film director, it's kind of like when you do like a big movie, you have to pull in all of these different people. You all have to share them alongside this one purpose. You're not actually going to have control over all of it. Most of your time is going to be spent in like budgeting and hiring the right people and all this other stuff, and then building that purpose. And so there's this kind of this indirect, like you don't have direct control of it. You're completely controlled by the influence, and I felt kind of really connected with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think adding to what Mark said, like I think what I liked about the chef is this idea, it's more like an executive chef who is someone who is sort of like setting the menu and curating the experience, but they aren't necessarily making the food, so someone on that level, and so they have to inspire the team to make it, and that's what's ultimately going to the customer, but also then that there's this other side of house, like the chef's in charge of back of the house that makes the food, but there's this whole other side that's so important to a restaurant experience of the service and the waiters and making reservations and that whole experience that is just as important to the business. And so I thought like that part was a good analogy to product because there's one side of the business we have a lot of sort of not necessarily control, but inspiration and management over. And then the other side of the business really matters, and we're just like, please do a good job too.
Yeah. I think to create long-term value and to solve meaningful problems, which is, I think, is what probably everybody in this room is interested in doing, product leaders have to say no a lot. It's not always easy, but you have to do it. So we ask this question, what keeps product leaders from making the right decisions, from sometimes from saying no when they should? And this is what we said. So this one I have to go to you, Megan, because the three of us said strategy. I think all of these are very connected, but why did you go with
Totally. I mean, I do think shiny object syndrome is a subset of poor strategy, but I just felt from a startup perspective that is such an important thing to be wary of, is you can move so quickly from like, oh, this is a good idea, this is a good idea, this is a good idea, and you need to like find stability in your vision and really push for it and make sure that the customers and the team don't feel like you're shifting too quickly, that there is a path and there is meaning behind it, and that you're not just like, oh yeah, we're gonna do an ICO.
Everybody start a white paper. You guys want to add anything else?
I'd be curious to hear about the panel and like how, because we're all B2B, how that works with large customers, right? So when you have a large customer that's requesting something that, you know, it maybe falls outside of your vision, your roadmap, what does that look like? I'm curious.
It's painful. I mean, especially since we're small, like our large customers are very important to our bottom line. So there are definitely things we'll do that we probably won't do 2 years from now, and it's just a natural part of the scaling process. Is when you're small and you're lucky enough to work with some great big companies who are paying you good money, you sometimes do what they say, and that's part of it. But hopefully what it is you can collaborate with them, understand what they want, and then try to give it to them in a way that matches your vision. And a lot of times I have seen at current company and the previous company I was at, where a big enterprise company will come in and they'll say they want this thing that like, just, it's like, what? Why do you want that? And then when you go in and collaborate and understand the core problem they're solving, you can reach a middle ground that fits the vision for your product and sometimes is way better than them. And that's when it's wonderful.
Yeah. If I can add to that, because we also work with large customers, I think one is being aware of what they represent to your business, right? How many users, how much usage, what are they using, why? And also aligning their vision with yours. I think that sometimes we've been asked to do what other companies already built over many years, and it exists and it's there and they think they want it. And then when we really talk about what they're trying to achieve, they realize that that's not really where they're headed and that's not where we're headed. And we're like, look, we're aligned. So there is a little bit of, you know, trying to convince them that maybe it's not what they're looking for. And other times we do the opposite. They come up with things that we weren't thinking, and we really have to go in and investigate and think about what it would mean for us to go after an opportunity, and see how it matches with their vision and whether it does align or not.
Yeah, I think that like kind of goes back to, I think, to strategy as well. I think like really great strategy, like we sometimes use the phrase a framework of no's, like really great strategy is a framework of no. So you can explain what you're going to do and what you're not going to do. And it's something that we use internally really heavily, but I think over the last little bit, what we've also realized is if you have a strong strategy and it's a framework of no, it's not just a framework of no for us, it's also a framework we can explain to our customers. Yeah. And it's actually interesting, like the conversations that come out of that are way more interesting than even going down the rat hole of trying to figure out exactly what they're trying to do. And just kind of explaining what our point of view is and really helping them structure their thinking sometimes and what is important and what's not important. And then pain, obviously, a lot of pain. Yeah.
I think also, you know, working with other teams, like for us, the partner success team is essential because sometimes they'll know workarounds or they have thought about this already. Other customers have asked for the same thing. And so also tracking who is asking what and when, because somebody could be really loud. And I think that's why one of the options up there was loudest customers, right? Because you could have a very loud customer, and then if you give them what they want, they're like, that's great, right?
For sure.
If you take it away, they're like, no, don't take it away. It's really interesting once you get into the why of some of these things they're asking for. Let's go to the next one. I'd say product leadership is hard. I think I've seen a lot of panels where it's like, oh, product management, it's very difficult. We were all curious about what were the greatest challenges, and so these were the 4 challenges we were thinking of, and it's really interesting how we answered.
Boom.
So
This was
it's
not
hard
planned.
in different ways, apparently. Everybody had a very different thought on this.
Well, I think it's all the different stages of our companies. It's like if you look at it, I think it's about where the company is, because I think the product challenges go hand in hand. Like for an early stage company, like we want to make our current customers happy, but like if we're not getting more customers, like that's our primary, like that has to be our primary focus. So my challenge is how can I best support sales? And I think if you go down the line, it's all like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're right, and we're at a point where we're trying to start scaling and growing, and what markets do we go after? How do we grow our team? How do we have processes that don't just work for 5 or 10 people, but how do they work now for 20 or 30 people? So yeah, for us, the focus is definitely on scaling, and supporting sales is a big part of that.
Yeah, for us, I mean, we're the PM team at Clio is 9 right now, so, and we've kind of stabilized a little bit at 9, and we've, for the first time, started to introduce hierarchy within the product organization, and I think even we're taking a different approach to hierarchy across the company, and so as soon as you start to put in hierarchy, distributed offices, and alignment and communication becomes really challenging, and I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier, where we spend a lot of our time focusing on getting buy-in up front. And I think that's just as a result of the stage of the company that we're at.
Yeah, and for me, it's finding and growing product managers. I think we're probably in the 18 people or so inside our product management team. It's 18, and it's just probably spends, like for me, like a disproportionate amount of my time figuring out where we can find really, really great people. It's fun because it's like people from product can come from all kind of different directions into product management. We have a lot of people that came from our customer success team or a customer support team or engineering team, obviously external hires as well. But kind of managing that talent pool and knowing how critical that is to the role that we have inside of the business is super important. This is not a hiring pitch. This is just me sharing my challenges. But if you do, interested in a cool role, yeah.
This next question I really like, because we've had a lot of conversations with our team around what product market fit means, and how do you define that? And I think for early stage growth companies, it's slightly different how we think about it. So this is why I really love this question, because we actually all answered it in the exact same way. So B2B, I think retention and renewals is absolutely key. Megan, what do you think about this one?
Yeah, I mean, you have to have happy customers. Like, it all comes down to that. Like, you can sell people, but they don't stay. You don't have a good fit at all.
No. Yeah, I think all the other things are essential, and they feel good, and they lead to retention and renewals. But if you have the top 3 and you don't have retention and renewals, it's just not. You don't have a company, right? Then you have a lot of vanity metrics or a very cool culture, a very cool company, great marketing, great sales, but people are not sticking around, and that's a huge problem.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's also a metric that you can really go after, right? As a B2B PM, like you can really go after retention. You can meaningfully move it, and I think that allows me to connect really closely with it. And I think when you can meaningfully move a metric like that and see the result of on your bottom line as an organization, I think that's really empowering for showing product market fit of the org and of your customers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and kind of to that point, like it's obviously a lagging indicator, but it's so closely connected, and there's so many points where you can influence this, which is incredibly powerful. I also think like it kind of goes back to this very core value of what you're doing inside of product. You're trying to build these products that are so valuable that people will give you money. And the reality is the first time that they sign up, they actually don't know what they bought yet. And so it's only first renewal time, during renewal, that they'll realize, or that they'll actually show you through their money, through their renewal, that they actually value the product in the way that they thought they would value it.
It's not an innovation budget or an experimental budget, or let's try and see how this goes budget. Last question, I don't think we need to get into it, but I do want to show what we said. So what's the key to ensuring PM, design, engineering, QA teams working well together? And I'd argue working well with everybody else, with product marketing, with sales, with everybody. And the answer is obviously trust. I say obviously because we all said the same thing, but I think we all still agree, right? Let's just move on to the next one so we stay on time. All right, measuring success. I think there's three more questions to go, and this one is super important. How do you measure? How do you validate? How do you make sure that you're not just shipping out there, that you're not this feature factory? Mark, maybe we start with you on that one.
Sure. So we are pretty religious about setting success metrics up front. And I think that gives us two things. The first is we get to identify whether there's any additional tracking we need to understand the full ROI of the thing that we're about to ship. So that's number one. And then I think we can immediately, as soon as it's shipped, understand whether it's been being successful or not, because we had really clear success metrics up front. And for us, like, that's at the core of how we set, or how we identify success, is we actually do it before we write a single line of code, before we do a single design, and we do it at kind of at the problem level, and that allows us to really identify success in a meaningful way.
Yeah, we kind of have, like, just kind of something we do similarly, like the way that we think about product and about investments that we make is we call them bets. So we're betting on something, we're betting on a feature, and then making sure upfront we understand what impact it will have. And I think another really important tool that we've had is kind of a framework to hang that on. So we have this metrics framework, just kind of 4 categories of health metrics that we track in the business. Lagging metrics like retention, renewal, revenue, ARR. Kind of on one end, we have these leading metrics that are activities. How many times do we ship? How good are we in terms of predicting our roadmap? Like, what's the uptime of the software? Things that we can really directly control. And then in the middle, usage metrics and customer value metrics that are good proxies to the customer value that we deliver. As you're kind of looking at that entire picture, you kind of understand, like, it's kind of like an X-ray of the health of the product inside of the business. And then, to your point, figuring out what bets are you going to make to impact what part of that. Like, which metrics are you going to go with affect? And then making sure that you figure it out up front so that you can later measure that and figure out how effective you become.
Yeah, I mean, I think especially early stage, like, data can be amazing, and it can also lead you astray because you kind of have to make big bets, and big bets are actually less risky to make in an early stage startup than not making big enough bets, because you have to make sure that you're going to push fast enough to get real value to the customer. And so a lot of it is we'll come up with something that we think is like a fundamental game-changing feature. We get it out there, we talk to our customers about it, we go through it, and sometimes you find out that it wasn't a game-changing feature, it was a nice-to-have feature, and then you keep searching for the game-changing feature that is going to actually mean that people sign up for it and they stay for it. And that's kind of like the early startup hunt. And for sure, there's engagement metrics and retention metrics, and we're looking at all of that. But I think it's like a different style with an early stage startup, because you have to it's kind of like whitewater rafting. Like, you have to go with it a little more, and you're not in the big cruise ship where you're like fully controlling everything.
Yeah, I think the only thing I can add to what you all said is making data important, making customer development important, making user research important, and more than anything, I think learning and just being willing to be wrong, and being willing to also know that if something goes well, to try to double down on that and invest more into it. Let's look at the next question. So I think this is maybe one of the most important topics, definitely this year, and I would say it should have been since the beginning of time, and it hasn't been. So diversity and inclusion is a very important topic. I think there's a lot to do in tech, a lot to do in every industry. So I'd like to ask what we're doing to make our product teams more diverse and more inclusive. Who wants to start?
Sure. Yay. So I think one thing that's really something I really enjoy about product management, and I think what attracts me to the discipline, is is you encounter really interesting people inside of it. And there's something, like people, there's kind of this kind of cliche of like there's no fixed path to become a product manager, and that's absolutely true. And that causes that people that are in product management come from really, really diverse backgrounds. And I mean, hey, you have people coming from liberal arts, you have people that are engineers, that come from business backgrounds, and it almost like organically creates a really like diverse and diverse kind of group of people that are inside of typical product management teams. It's something we see at Hootsuite as well. If you look at the diversity, the shape of our product management team, even compared to the rest of the company, it's probably the most diverse group of people. And it's something that we as a company are also trying to improve as well. And our big, without speaking too longer, like our big focus has very much been on recruiting. Like one thing that we've definitely found, and I think a lot of companies that are trying to invest heavily in diversity is trying to understand what the diversity looks like in their company, but look at it at the very front of the funnel, and making sure, and like one big thing that we rooted out, for example, is interviewing for culture fits. And just trying to explore that a bit. Like, what does that mean, culture fit? What are our values? How are we going to measure those values? And try to become more, a bit more detached in many ways from these kind of really vague terms that are really just there to hire more people like we are, like more people like us. And so I think that's been a pretty effective tool for us.
Yeah. Megan, how do you think about it? Obviously, as a woman representing here.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge topic, and I definitely couldn't express everything I feel about it in this short amount of time. But I'll say I do agree, top of the funnel, like think when you're recruiting, how can you get beyond your immediate network and really get to networks that maybe you aren't reaching, because a lot of it is about how do you get these candidates to apply, because, you know, I mean, typical tech problem is just like, startup bros hiring more of their startup bros, and you want to avoid that because it'll make your business worse. It just will. In terms of what we do, we definitely try to think about the top of the funnel recruiting. We also are an all-remote company, which allows for much more diversity because you can live anywhere in the world. You can fit your schedule around your kids. You can fit your schedule around any other thing that you might want to do. And it allows you to make your work and life live together, and so it allows for more diverse people to find success at the company. And so that's been really great for us. But I think also it comes back to what we were talking about, what makes a great product leader too, is just like empathy. And I think that as product leaders, we can help the organization have more empathy, because it is something we're thinking about so carefully, and hopefully we can pass that along.
Mark?
Yeah, not too much to add there. I think you're going to be able to tell I'm a product manager from this answer. But we kind of think about it as two distinct but highly coupled problems. The first is around inclusion, which is more of a retention problem. We need to figure out how to support a really diverse group of people once they're inside of the organization. And so that kind of goes at the company level, thinking of it like things like you know, paternity and maternity leave and equal pay and all of that kind of stuff. And then we have the diversity side, which is around the acquisition side, and making sure that our funnel is as non-biased as possible. And I think that stuff together, we kind of put targeted efforts to both of those is where we really try and focus.
Yeah, no, this is great. I'm glad we're talking about this. I think the only thing I can add is, as leaders, I think what we believe is really important. And there's three things for me. Is one, respect for all human beings. Two, privilege is a spectrum. I really think there is a spectrum, and if you're not aware of where you fall on it, then you're not going to have respect for those that are under it, and nobody should be looking down on anybody that's falling below you on that spectrum that unfortunately exists. I think the third one is believing that diversity and inclusion matters, right? If you don't believe it, then you're not going to do anything about it. And coupled with that is also believing that this idea of meritocracy that has been around in tech since the beginning of tech, that sometimes it's a narrative that we tell ourselves, right? Or that others have told themselves to make excuses for not making this a priority. So for the last question, I think we wanted to end with like what's changing in product management, and is this a change that we agree with? What do you think is something that's top of mind in terms of how you see it changing?
I can start. I think the change that I really love that's happening in product management we talked about earlier, which is in B2B product management specifically, that you're seeing more of an emphasis on great customer experience, great user experience, great design, delighting customers. And I think that, one, like as a product manager, if I'm not trying to delight our customers, then I don't know how I would motivate myself. Because if I don't try to empathize with them and think about how to make their life better, then I can't bring myself to care about any of it. So I think it's a great change for me personally to see the industry caring about it, and it's a great change for all of our end customers.
Go.
So I think we talked a lot about this, but the move to themes, as they will, and I think in general it is something that I agree with, although I will have two kind of things that you have to watch out for if you're going to move to themes. The first is that the themes have to be really tightly coupled to customer problems. And then the second is that you have to maintain the level of accountability within the organization if you're going to move to those themes. Because oftentimes you remove the silos, but it also allows you to kind of lead towards the non-accountability line of kind of working. So those are kind of the two things I would keep in mind.
Yeah, maybe we'll try to come up with something else. So I think one big trend is obviously data, like the use of data in decision making, and it's obviously affects all product managers everywhere, and that's a really important trend. Like definitely one thing that I'm seeing around that, I see a lot of teams adopt that. And a lot of product managers adopt that in a really unsophisticated way, and I think it's very easy to get into to kind of follow, let's call it the data trend and data decision-making trend without actually doing it. I think Mark mentioned, for example, setting up what you're going to measure success on before you start. That's like a good example of a sophisticated way of looking at data. See a lot of teams come up with data after the fact and try to find data that matches a narrative. And it's so easy. It's so easy to fall into that trap, and it feels like you're doing the right thing, but you're not really. So it's a big trend. Everybody's talking about it, but it's still actually fairly rare to see people use it really effectively.
Yeah, I think for me, it's seeing more mission-driven collaboration and more blurring of roles. I don't think everybody should be a designer engineer at the same time, but I do see engineers coming up with ideas and caring about the problem first. I see designers prototyping and building for the browser. I see PMs really trying to collaborate more with marketing and with sales and with success. I think that's part of the role, but there's more of an interest and more of an excitement around going to market. So I think that collaboration is something that's cool to see, and I'd like to see much more of. All right, well, that's all our questions. So thanks to everybody for coming. If we want to open it up for Q&A.
Nice.
Do we have a mic? Yeah. Thank you.
Nice.
Yeah, I actually have more of a comment than a question, and I'm hoping that you'll tell me I'm completely wrong. So I by explanation, I've got 30 years in the hardware and silicon design side of the world, and work for some big companies doing that. And I was amazed that I didn't hear a couple of things in the conversation, right? And maybe it's just that wasn't where you guys were taking this, but I didn't hear a whole lot of discussion in terms of how you fit into an ecosystem, how competition and timing of the market plays. I mean, I certainly, in my roles, always feel that we're running against a competitive clock if we're not there first with what we do. And we also talk about transitions in tech and the threats. And I didn't hear, any kind of discussion of what motivates in a product manager's world, that I live in a competitive world, and I'm up against, my idea is probably never original or by itself. Even if it was original, there are other bright people out there that intersect these things. and I'm just curious how you guys think about being in an ecosystem of other partners and as software companies, how you think about the hardware world and vice versa, because I have very different relationships. I work for a very big Fortune company, running a very big product team, and I know distinctly, the software partners that I partner with and how they perform on our platforms, and those that come along later in the game, end up having a different experience, especially as they talk about B2B and enterprise. So anyway, prove me wrong.
I think it's like, maybe just try to take a crack at that. Like I do feel like from where I started a while ago, which was very competitor-centric and market-centric, whereas a lot of thinking was really, and the positioning, I think, of the product was really determined by what the shape of the market looked like. I feel, and I think it's a good thing over the last couple of years, it's really evolved from that into becoming extremely customer-centric. And so when I think about the themes that we build and what we do, I think the root of it, or the core, is always customer-centric now. And then that doesn't mean that you need to still have a really good understanding of the market and the competitors and the competition. But I think I've made that mistake many times where you almost over-focus on competition.
So the big mistake I see software companies make time and time again is that they don't partner with the hardware company, and in their desire to be customer-centric, the actual delivery of it, we're the gate on the dinosaur side over here that, they wanted to do this amazing thing, but again, they didn't think about that ecosystem.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, I think from Hyper's perspective, we actually were birthed out of the insights of what the competition wasn't offering, and we believed in a more proactive strategy than the strategy that existed in the past in the spaces that we're in. And so we were birthed out of understanding competitors and knowing competitors, and even coming from competitors, right? So we definitely think about it a lot, but I think that the Mik's point is, and it's funny because before we were here, we were out there talking about sales battle cards and how I think it's just a topic that didn't come up. But I think we are definitely more focused on understanding the customer, because in many ways we're looking to be unique and be set apart. And kind of distinguish ourselves. And I think from a marketing perspective, it's creating a category. From a product perspective, it's creating something that's so valuable that it puts us in our own little world. But of course, that attracts others. And of course, there is an ecosystem. Another thing we didn't talk about is the ecosystem of integrations and partners, which is incredibly important. And it can take a lot of time and a lot of effort. And it goes beyond the product role. But it's definitely something that we are very much involved with. So I think, thank you for bringing that up. I think it's a great point.
I have two questions for you guys, hopefully quick. The first one is for those of you that have remote teams. I also have a completely remote team. What are some kind of unique things that you do to keep them motivated? Because from time to time, it's, I don't talk to my product managers every single day, right? And so at times, sometimes I feel like they get into their little silos and they get into their tunnel and they're just going down that road. And then when we get together, it's blah sometimes. So just kind of curious what you guys do to motivate your teams.
Yeah, I think we're the only all remote team, so I'll start first. I think for me, because I think about motivating not just product managers, but also engineers and like that whole side of the house. And I think it is a lot about understanding the person, because I think different people need different types of management and are just inspired by different things. And I know some people on our team who just want to understand the customer problem, get the idea, and then go. And if you bug them too much, they find that demotivating because they find it really annoying. And there are other people who want that connection and oh, let's get on a call and I'm going to really talk through it and I'm going to explain what happened, or even join a customer call. And then also specifically with product managers, I think just how much touch point they like, because sometimes people need time to go and kind of get in their mental hole, do customer interviews, do whatever, and then come back to you with something. And sometimes people feel really overwhelmed with the idea, I have a week and I have to do something really good, and that's so scary. And so it's better to check in and say hey, how are things going? Can I help direct you down the path? So I think there isn't one answer because people are hard to motivate. And honestly, people are hard to motivate in person or remote. And I think that with, like, when people talk about remote, they like to talk about all these things that, like, it's so hard to motivate people, it's so hard to communicate, it's so hard to, and it's like, all of those things are also hard in person. You can be right next to someone and they can be totally unmotivated and not understanding what you're saying.
Yeah, I think to add to that, and we do have some remote, quite a bit on the product side. I think it's important to have a respect for the person that's on the other side. So people that are remote need to remember that others are in an office that's crowded and loud and with bad Wi-Fi. And the people in those rooms need to be aware that, hey, maybe I commute myself. Maybe we can use a whiteboard that's a digital one for once. So I think there's things that come to empathy and collaboration with each other. But I agree that there's a lot of problems with an office space that we forget about because it has been the default for a long time. So I think it's also important to make sure that your teams that are remote, that they've done it before, I think, or that they have a really good inclination to be able to do it, because it's not for everybody. I think remote is something that's hard. You need the right space and the right attitude about it, because some people may just hide and work on the work, and eventually that is not enough.
Yeah, I think maybe like ownership and mission. Like I think that like it's important for teams that are in the same location as well. But I think having like that's something that we definitely found really powerful. And it's less with remote workers, but more with remote teams. So in our entire teams that are in different time zones and different locations, and them just having strong missions and strong purpose. Because they're going to make thousands of decisions every day, and you want to make sure that they're doing that in with like ownership and empowerment, but also with knowledge of what the purpose is of what they're trying to achieve.
I'll add one more just like really tactical thing, which is I think it's really important with remote to make sure everyone has like multiple tasks that they can do, because there is a point sometimes where you're remote, someone else is on a different time zone or what have you, and you're stuck. And like everyone sometimes gets stuck. And if you have multiple tasks, you just allow yourself to get stuck on one thing, move to another thing, get to a place where you can feel more confident, and then you can come back and be like, hey, I got stuck on this, can we talk about it? And I think that that's really important when working with people remote and in different time zones, that you can allow them to switch between things when they get to a point where they just like don't know what to do and need a check-in.
And that kind of actually led up to my second question too, is do any of you guys use product management software or anything else to track? And if you do, which ones do you use, or which ones have you used and you don't like, or just trying to get some different ideas of what different people use out there for roadmaps or daily tasks?
Yeah, I mean, I think briefly everybody could just say we use adulation products, so Jira, Confluence. We also use ProdPad. We use a lot of Slack, and I think that Slack kind of brings it all together. And we have tested other tools here and there for road mapping and for communicating roadmaps, and I think we can't get away from sheets or spreadsheets. Like they're always a part of how we do things.
I think we probably switch tools annually. I mean, like it's so I think you have to go back to the problem that you're trying to get the tool to solve. Like really understand that problem, especially as a remote team. That's a lot bigger. And so really understand the problem, and sometimes like a Google Sheet solves the problem, sometimes it doesn't, but if you understand the problem, then I think you can really find a tool that will match it well, and you'll understand what you need out of that tool to solve the problem.
Yeah, I'm pretty cynical on tools in general. So, I mean, we use Optimizely, we use Google Sheets, we use Jira, Confluence, AHA, a whole bunch of things. It's always deeply concerning to me when people talk about, like there's something, when you talk too much about product management tools or tools that enable product management, because it's so easy to get very excited about that and to kind of miss the actual collaboration, miss the actual process. And yeah, I don't know, a bit cynical. Anyway.
I mean, I agree with that. I think you do need a ticketing tool for sure. I have used Jira before. I don't mind it. It feels a little clunky to me. We use Clubhouse right now. It does essentially the same as Jira, but slightly less, and like feels slightly slimmer, which I love. But as long as you have a tool that you can ticket and assign to someone and write comments, like the rest of it honestly is like gravy. Like maybe it can integrate with something that really matters and makes a difference, great. But so yeah, we use Clubhouse, we use Google Docs, we use Slack, and then we do a lot of video calls.
Cool, awesome.
I think we have a question for one more.
Hi, just to add to that conversation, I use Trello a lot as well, and I love Slack. I think Slack is the best thing ever. Just to set the context of my question, so we're building a knowledge sharing marketplace, so where we're connecting knowledge seekers with knowledge sharers, where you can pick one's brain for a fee. And it was about your third question, I think, which is what defines success. So we can get a lot of people on the platform. We're B2B, so we go to communities to connect knowledge within them. It's the renewals and particularly the engagement is where, after people get over the novelty, how do we not stop people going to Google for their knowledge and going to people? It's not about how to stop them to do that, but how to encourage them to think of our platform first. So do you have any particular tips or advice on increasing engagement where you're creating a new form of behavior? And even, Hazlett, just when you said you change tools annually, we don't want our customers to say that. So how do we get them to continuously create a new behavior and then sustain behavior from your experience?
The marketplace side is really, really interesting because one thing, I'm not sure if it really answers your questions, but a couple of marketplaces that I've been involved in, it's very, ideally the re-engagement comes from the value of the other side of the marketplace. There's so much valuable people to connect with on the other side that that's the motion that creates the re-engagement. So I think it's hard to kind of step away from that core value prop. You're not going to artificially generate re-engagement on top of that. But I think as you have that, I think all of the other kind of growth tools, like a re-engagement growth tools or techniques should be helpful to you. Things like re-engagement emails, re-engagement notifications, making that as contextual and as connected to actions as possible. I think all of those techniques are really cool. One thing, this is a bit of a tool plug, but I just said I was cynical about tools. Tools like Mixpanel and where that connect analytics and behavior in product with actions. I'm not sure if you're on mobile or if you're somewhere else. That's a really powerful combination to be able to do kind of re-engagement campaigns in a very, very cheap way with really short feedback cycles. So, because I think it's, we have a team that just focuses on growth and re-engagement, and you just need to have all of these experiments running at the same, in sequence to figure out those little points of potential re-engagement. I'm sure what you guys have to add.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with Mik. I think it's not knowing your business. It's whatever you can find that is either this is a moment where they need us and we can try to figure out what that is and send them something at that time, or this is a moment when we have really valuable information and send that. And then for both, you experiment with how you repackage that and subject line it and express it so that it's as valuable as possible so it drives the most re-engagement.
I think we've run out of time, so thank you, Megan, Mark, and Mik, and thank you all for being here and staying a few minutes extra over. We'll continue online on Twitter with hashtag B2B Product Lead. We might stick around here if anybody wants to chat a bit. Thanks for coming and enjoy South by.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Guys.
Thanks so much.